Hi guys, it's Fear Royalty here once again with another video. It was one Saturday night. I was bored. I was on my laptop going about my business as usual. The television was on in the other room. My father asked me if I wanted to see a movie with him. Having nothing better to do in my time, I accepted the offer. When I first saw the movie Forrest Gump, I saw adventure, an adventure around town, an adventure throughout the United States, an adventure in Vietnam, an adventure in the mind even. For a movie so diverse, it is surprisingly grounded in its themes, and its pace is surprisingly adequate for the amount of periods the movie covers. Throughout the film, Forrest compares the conflict between fate and personal choice. Before I go any further into the analysis, I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the tone of Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump has one of the most inspiring and hopeful tones of any movie I've ever seen. Forrest Gump, a man of low IQ, and physically disabled at first in the story, overcomes his physical disability altogether when he has to run from bullies, and even later ends up joining the football team, and later the army, and becomes a war hero, and becomes a star ping pong player, and becomes a renowned shrimping boat captain, and a symbol of hope throughout all of America. Even when he's shot by a stinking bullet, he just treats it as something just jumped up and bit him. This sense of hope that he inspires in people even starts to affect his friends. Lieutenant Dan, who lost his legs in the army, is forced to live off of welfare and becomes a severe alcoholic. He becomes bitter towards the gospel of Jesus Christ, presumably because he feels like his lost legs are all a part of God's plan, and that plan severely contradicted his own, which was to stay out in the field and die with honor. But when he later joins Forrest and becomes his first mate, and a hurricane strikes, causing shrimping to become much easier for Forrest and Lieutenant Dan, his faith in Jesus is restored, and he thanks Forrest for saving his life, signifying that he is finally content with his life in his current state. Forrest's childhood friend Jenny also becomes self-destructive in the process of pursuing her destiny. She performs for a local bar where drunk men try to harass her. In her travels as a singer, she also uses drugs like LSD, cocaine, and possibly heroin, all in an attempt to escape from her past of sexual abuse and neglect. Eventually, the consequences of these actions, combined with the post-traumatic stress from her past, begin to drag on her, even causing her to contemplate suicide. But much like Lieutenant Dan, she finds peace in herself by escaping from her destructive lifestyle, returning to Forrest Gump, and eventually marrying him, allowing him to help her through the little life she has left, having contracted an incurable disease, presumably HIV. Purely by being himself, Forrest Gump manages to overcome his limitations and accomplishing many feats, not just for himself, but for others as well, helping others to find joy in their lives, despite their respective limitations. For better or for worse, the line between destiny and personal choice is really blurred throughout Forrest Gump. For a film with so much going on at one time, the pace of the film is surprisingly smooth. We see in films like Meet the Robinsons and even TV shows such as Dragon Ball Z that pieces of media that have a lot of stuff going on in them tend to have problems with pacing. Forrest Gump does not have these problems, surprisingly, and manages to convey three major eras in American history practically seamlessly, while conveying a man's life story, not to mention the fact that there's some good humor in there inserted every once in a while. While some of these periods may last longer than others, none of them ever really drag on. The great sense of timing in Forrest Gump not only feels smooth, but also helps the movie in many different ways. We can see why the characters act the way they act. We understand why Jenny turned to drugs and alcohol. We understand why Lieutenant Dan did the same, and we also understand why Lieutenant Dan tends to have a bossy attitude with people, more so than he should at times. We also see why Jenny rejects Forrest when he first proposes marriage to her. We even understand somewhat why Jenny's boyfriend acted abusive towards her. The pacing of the film allows us to see the motivations of the characters, and even the factors that influence their motivations. If the movie had spent more or less time explaining any of these, then it might have caused confusion among the audience, and we might not sympathize with these characters as much as we should. But the film is paced basically perfectly, and somehow manages to capture that perfect balance of time, which even helps to further our understanding of personal choice and factors that are outside of our control, and even how they affect us on a day-to-day basis. Much of the film is told in narrative form as an anecdote of a man's life. The film begins when Forrest is a child and is forced to wear leg braces as a result of having a crooked spine. We also see how much his mother cared for him and wanted to see equal treatment of him, as well as helping him adapt to the cruel world he'll be forced to go into later. More so than other parents, especially Jenny's, we slowly see him progress from being ostracized from his classmates to being one of the most influential figures of the 20th century. We also see how many of his friends, such as Jenny and Lieutenant Dan, seek far into depression and self-destructive behavior as the events that occurred when they were younger and ideas of who they should be when they're older, combined with the newfound stresses of the adult world, begin to pile up inside of them. The decisions of these people not only start to affect themselves, but also Forrest deeply, who becomes increasingly frustrated with all the changes in his friends' lives. This even causes him to develop an arguably escapist attitude himself when he starts running for no particular reason. Despite this, we still see that Forrest has not deteriorated to the state that many of his friends have. Many will attribute this to his caring mother, who emphasized the importance of making good decisions, to the point where Forrest never even had a desire to pursue the self-destructive behaviors of his friends. Many would also argue that Forrest was naturally a good person and had good intentions at heart, and willingly chose to make good decisions throughout his life on his own volition. Likewise, many people argue whether or not Jenny and Lieutenant Dan are still considered responsible for their decisions because of their respective backgrounds, despite their respective backgrounds and events that have occurred to them. The use of anecdote helps to convey the conflict between fate and personal choice, because we see it through the eyes of a man who has experienced it all, and as a result it comes off as more powerful and influential. Throughout the film, many very contrary ideas are juxtaposed. To provide context, the two main protagonists, Forrest and Jenny, surprisingly have a lot in common with one another. They are both ambitious, they are both opportunistic, taking opportunities when they are given to them, yet they live very different lives, in the words of Jenny. Jenny's pursuit of hope drives her to despair. Forrest's erratic change of careers makes him a grounded person, and he finds order and impulse. Lieutenant Dan frequently talks to Forrest as if he is a structured, grounded person with a lot of discipline in his life, when in reality, he is a very lost and confused person. Forrest, who is limited by cognitive disabilities, is probably more free than any person in the film, and has been given probably more opportunities than anyone on the planet. Forrest even asserts towards the end of the movie that in many ways, destiny and personal choice both exist in the world. Many find it difficult to imagine a world where we have a set destiny or path that we're supposed to lead, yet we are still in control of the events to help to shape our destiny. In a word, disorder and order are not as different as they might seem, and the world is full of contradictions. There are many events throughout the movie that can be applied to people's lives. Perhaps that's why it has remained so widely popular over the years. Because Jenny's father sexually abused her as a child, presumably to supplement his deceased wife, living in denial. Consequently, Jenny turned to drugs and alcohol in an attempt to escape from her traumatic past. Many argue that Jenny ruined her own life on her own volition, and she is solely to blame for the place she is now, and that her poor background cannot excuse the mistakes she has made. Others contend that she was shaped entirely by her surroundings, and her unhappiness was caused solely by the abuse of her father. Many to this day argue whether or not drug users who have suffered from similar events in their life should be given a chance to open up about their lives and change, rather than waste away 20 years of their life in a cold, boring, cruel jail cell. This can even be related to crimes committed by the mentally ill, such as James Holmes, the person who has committed the Aurora Theater shooting. During his murder trial, members of the jury argue whether or not his crimes were his own or if they were caused purely by his own volition. What appears to be two people with very different lives, as Jenny put it, is actually a complex visual metaphor for two ideas that stump many people dead in their tracks and conflict them. The repetition of scenes throughout the film helps to make the events in the movie, to make the events happening to Forrest more relatable to the audience. In one scene, we see a flashback of Bubba's family history, where his mother and great-grandparents are all seen working for white customers with seemingly no way out of their position. When the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company becomes successful and Forrest donates to the family of Bubba, we see a white woman serving Bubba's black mother. We also see Jenny leave frequently throughout the film. She leaves when they meet up at the Army Club. She leaves to go on a bus to vainly pursue her happiness. She leaves after briefly coming back to see Forrest again after a presumably difficult period in her life. Each and every one of these transitions is followed by Forrest saying, just like that, she was gone. In life, many times people experience déjà vu, events that seemingly repeat themselves, almost in a cycle. People also see people come and go, and you never know when things might change, but many still believe that they have a destiny to follow, which drives many of the erratic decisions made by people, which is a paradox in and of itself that this film extensively explores. Through personal narrative and relatable examples, Forrest Gump explores a key paradox in our world today, that our choices can affect a predetermined destiny, that a person's destiny can be dictated by events outside of their control, but that events that we can control can shape our destiny as well. In a world where disorder can contribute to order and vice versa, it's hard to say that we truly have any control over anything. So why do we even bother pondering this question? Because in this world, we're still left with the consequences of our actions, and we naturally find it important to try to control as much of our lives as we can, and secure it for as long as we can. This is why governments are extremely defensive of their borders. This is also why policemen are so strict on drug laws. And this is why parents are so strict when letting their little children watch movies with questionable content. Because once we lose the control we have over the things we care about, it's extremely difficult to get them back. Thanks for watching.